Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the book review and note taking, some things that you should be familiar with already. We did discuss note taking in the past. What I wanted to do is cover the information in the book once again and give you some tips and do's and don'ts when it comes to the next major assignment, which is your book review, which we'll talk about in some detail in a minute. Now, you should be in the process of gathering more information. You turned in a bibliography, got feedback on that. You should continue to be building your bibliography, primary and secondary sources. You know what the syllabus said about the combination that you need. You need both primary and secondary sources. Primary sources being, of course, accounts that happened at the time. Secondary sources probably will be the majority of your bibliography in the final product of the paper, but you will also have primary sources. So a lot of secondary sources, several primary sources, and upon those you will build your argument and then write your paper. I want to make clear about something that you should be familiar with: paraphrasing and not plagiarizing. When you do take notes, make sure that you are effectively taking notes. If you quote something directly from an author, meaning you're writing or reading a book about foreign involvement in the Civil War, as an example. If you're reading a secondary source, a book that was written 5 or 6 years ago, and you want to include a direct quote from that particular author and his or her opinion about the subject, you can, that's fine. But you need to make sure it is a direct quote. And therefore, in a paper, you will have to have either a footnote or an endnote. If you are paraphrasing is generally taking the main ideas of an author and then putting them in your paper. It's not word for word, but they are not your ideas or thoughts about a given subject. It's fine. You still have to do a citation. So it's not word for word. So obviously you will not need to put it in direct quotes, but you still have to do a citation for it. And we're going to talk about how you do those in future discussions. Obviously, you're going to use some type of citation, a footnote or endnote. Again, that is completely and totally up to you. So let us look at some examples. Examples of where you would use those type of citations. We're going to go to something I am familiar with. This would be a paper, about a 15-page paper, again, about the length of your research paper, except this was a conference presentation. And that's why I bring these up a lot as examples. Not only am I familiar with them because I wrote them, but secondly, it's the same kind of length that you're going to be working with. So this was a paper given at a historical conference. And as you can see, it doesn't have a bibliography because you don't and are not required to have one. But you are required to have, since it is reviewed by others, you are required to have citations in the form, in this case, of footnotes. I have footnotes. Now, the first footnote is at the bottom of this paragraph. And so what I did here is said, new studies argue that the area of Natchitoches went through a renaissance of exports thanks to the Spanish efforts to encourage tobacco production. Again, not a word for word account of what one particular author has said about Natchitoches in the late part of the 18th century, but it's the general gist of the author. So for that, and if you incorporate more than one source, you would use a footnote. So there it is. There is the full footnote. It doesn't look like a bibliography. Why? Well, you have to have, for the most part, a page number in a citation. In this example, I'm referencing an entire book because I'm just referencing the idea without a particular page number. So we've got two sources here, and your footnote or endnote can have more than one source. This one has two. The second footnote, I described the Louisiana Territory when Congress divided it into Orleans and to Louisiana. And so I used, in this case, a PhD dissertation. This was, of all folks, Dr. Leberton, who taught here at NSU for a long time. So you have a citation method for a dissertation, and it's a specific page number. So you've got, again, the page number right there. If we were to scroll down a little bit further and maybe find a direct quote, here's one right here. This would be a direct quote and it comes from the book on the New Orleans slave rebellion in 1811. So is actually a primary source quote, and it's from one of the Claibornes, who were, of course, territorial governor. So I did a direct quote here, and I quoted it from a secondary source, and that's fine. You can put the source right there, but here it is. It is this particular book where I got the quote. Now, if you were quoting the author himself, that's fine. You can put it in the quote. I just happen to be quoting because there's an introduction, a reference to what someone thought of the Louisiana Territory before statehood. So again, there's two different methods by which you're going to need to do a citation. And I say this because you're going to be taking notes. And note taking is something of an art form. So scrolling through here, again, you can see a reference with multiple sources. Here you have a book by F. Todd Smith. Here you have a chapter within a book, which you might come across in your particular subject. And so the difference, obviously, between a footnote and an endnote is that you're going to have a page number. You're not going to have a page number in your bibliography unless it is an article. So a book you don't, because you're just referencing the whole book. But you have to put the page numbers if it is an article, and that's a separate, or it can be together in your bibliography. You know, you can put your secondary sources together. If you want to bump out books and then have a separate section of articles, you can do that too. The main thing I want to stress is to separate your primary and secondary sources. So again, here's an example of a couple of sources. Let me make this a little bit larger. Secondary source, a book on the Louisiana Purchase, and I specifically referenced a couple of pages there. And that note 6, if we were to go back and look at it, there it is. Even in large, it's small. So you can see that in this paragraph, I took the main ideas from an author who had written about Louisiana. And so I gave that author credit. Now, did I word for word quote that particular author? I didn't, but it didn't matter. I took the ideas of that author and I paraphrased. And so you'll see a footnote here. And when you scroll down at the end of the page, there it is. So if you wanted to read more about this, it comes from this book and this section of the book. A little further down, we've got a direct quote from a primary source. A well-informed gentleman now residing in Louisiana. It's a reference to John Sibley of Sibley Lake, that John Sibley. And that was a primary source because you can see it right here. It's a letter from the territorial governor to the president of the United States in 1803. And this particular primary source is in a collection that's already published. So it's not like going to an archives and finding an old dusty letter. This is a published source, that is the territorial papers of the United States, is in multiple volumes. And you see you've got all of the reference information here. You've got the city where it's printed and the year, and you've also got the select pages that I chose. So there you have it right there. So the reason I'm going into this in some detail is because you have to understand these concepts when we are talking about, let me go back to the share screen so we are all on the same page here. Okay. You know, taking notes and organizing your thoughts is very important for the research that you do. So I think I said before that what you might want to do is have a system by which you have a source in front of you and you take notes, and you have a computer file, you have a legal pad, different colors, you highlight when you have a direct quote. If you are making your own notes and it's just something you want to think about using later, that's fine. If it is your own words, your thesis is going to be in your own words. But if you're using a book, a secondary source, such as talking about the Russian Revolution, or to talk about African Americans' role in Reconstruction after the Civil War, you have your argument, you have your thesis, you have the arguments of folks who are using you're using their research, and you'll also have direct quotes. So you want to keep that all straight. You don't want to get in the trouble of not doing the proper citation. And that's when you're going to get into, plagiarizing. Sometimes it's accidental as far as, I didn't get my sources, but if you turn something in, claim it as your own, and it isn't your own, that's not good. So this is just to let you know that when you organize your note taking, it is difficult sometimes to do. It is a challenge, but you have to keep everything clear. Later on, you're going to do an outline. You're going to organize all those thoughts, all those sources that you've used. You're going to randomly search through books and sources, articles that you have, your primary sources, to put together a coherent research paper. But the general rule is, and it's a good one to follow, acknowledge your source. That's the best rule of thumb. Okay. So briefly, I wouldn't tell you how to organize, and I'm not going to check on how you organize your notes. That has to be a system that works for you. Again, what I would do, and I've said it before, is have one piece of paper, one pad of paper, one computer file that you're reading through a book and you've taken some notes on it, and you want to organize those notes. So you put it all together for your paper. And your paper, sometimes it can be a challenge to say, I'm going to write it from beginning to end. Sometimes you write the middle of the paper first. You write your opening paragraph, or you write your opening paragraph last. Again, there's no, a required way to do it. You just have to do it in a manner that works for you. So I also wanted to put up here a sample book review. Now, if we were to go back to Moodle, let's do that very quickly. Here we go. I want to show you what resources are on Moodle as you get through this assignment. Assuming I can find all of it. Here we go. Okay. Let's go backwards here. Okay. When you turn in the book review, you're going to have a title page, and I think I placed the sample title page in the week that it is due, or right before the week that it is due. Okay, right here. I think we actually pulled it up. Let's see if we can find it again. There we go. Book review title page. It's opening Word right now. Okay, you've probably seen this already. Let's make sure it's shared by everybody. So when you write your book review, you want to turn it in like this. This is fictional student Chuck U. Farley, who's a student in History 4000. There's the date of the assignment. And you were going to do book review of, and this is, again, a real book, but this is how you're going to put the title of your book review. Author, title of the book, and basically the citation. Again, a little bit like the bibliography, a little bit like the footnotes or endnotes. Obviously, you're not going to put a page number because you're reviewing the whole book, and that's going to be your review. So here's the title page, and it's going to look very similar to the sample, completed sample book review that not only is in the textbook, but the one I've linked from JSTOR. So this should be the format for your book review. Again, notice I said book review and not book report. All right, let's go back to the share screen. I know we're jumping around, but I've got a bunch of resources for you so that you're familiar with what we're going to be doing. Doesn't look like I downloaded the book review, so we'll just have to pull it up again and follow the clicking here. Go back to the resources, you can see where we have it. Sample book review. This is what you have to do when you're off campus. Jump through all these extra hoops here. Okay, there it is. Let's do this. Let's download it so y'all can see it a little bit better. Okay, title page, it tells you where it comes from. Again, this isn't a book that we're assigned. This isn't a book that you have to read, obviously. It's just how you would model your academic book review, and that's what you're doing. So it's somewhat similar at the top. You've got the bibliographical reference there, not exactly the way I wanted you to require it because it's got things like the price of the book, but this is how it appears in a journal. And this particular journal is called the William and Mary Quarterly. That is a 4-time-a-year journal for people who specialize in colonial and early American history. And so you'll see 3 or 4 articles in the course of this particular issue, followed by book reviews and other announcements about conferences or something like that. So here you go. If you are interested in this field and you pick up this journal or subscribe to it, and they're expensive, they cost anyway from $40 to more than $100 a year. But if you specialize in a certain area of history as a student or as a professor, you would get this particular journal. And one of the reasons you get it is you want to read reviews of books that are coming out in the area that you're interested in. So here's a review of a classic, one that I've actually assigned in my American Revolution class. This is Paul Revere's Ride. So this is something you should look at. You should read this because it is effectively a 2-page academic book review. At the bottom here, again, a little different than the format I want you to do, but this is fairly standard for book reviews in these journals. You have where you're affiliated with, the particular college where you work at, and your name right there. So having done book reviews myself, it's basically the journal tells you what information they want you to put at the top. They have a certain format, and then they give you a word count. This is, again, 2 single-spaced pages. Yours is going to be 2 double-spaced pages. But the important thing about this review is to show you how you do a academic review. Let's go back and go through the guide that I kind of made up and have attached in Moodle. It's one of those do's and don'ts kind of thing. Just maybe tips for putting together that particular assignment. Okay, so you see a sample book review is in your textbook and the Benjamin text, and you've got the pages right there, 96 to 102. Already stated, you put the name of the author, title, publisher, place, and year at the top. I gave you a sample title page, so when you turn it in, it should look like that. The heading on it should all basically be the same, except your names are different and the books that you are reviewing are different. So remember, this is a secondary source. It's a source that is from your bibliography that you already turned in. And I have received the books that you're going to review. Books, not articles, not book reviews, but an actual book, an entire book. So what you want to do as the guidelines for an academic book review is to state the author's topic and thesis, which the author will easily tell you in many manner and fashion what their topic and thesis is. And you put that in the opening paragraph of your book review. You go through and talk about the evidence. If you were someone who was told to do a book review and you picked up another book on, a subject you think has been covered ad nauseum, it's like, oh, great, another book, another biography on Lincoln, just what we need. Why would the author write this particular book when there's, a billion books on the guy? Well, the author's going to tell you why his or her interpretation might be different. Other historians got it wrong. I found some new evidence based on the current, let's say, social climate of the United States. Our times we live in affect history. We should look at this in a different manner. A new book on Grant, for example, one example I use a lot, because, Grant was a bad general and he only won because he had more soldiers and he was a drunk and he was inept and there were scandals when he was president and, he didn't really handle Reconstruction very well. Well, that's changed. The interpretation of him has changed. You'll get that in the author's topic and thesis. And then you'll want to, of course, understand and process the evidence that the author uses for their topic and thesis. You will want to assess the argument. You, the student, will want to assess the argument. Do you find it convincing? Is it not convincing? You are doing research on the topic that your author of your book is also doing. So you're going to be familiar with it. So take a stand, be bold. Agree, disagree, that's fine. And then you close with your assessment of the assumptions and argument that the book make, the conclusions, and that is part of your review. This is not a book report. You don't turn in a chapter by chapter summary to me about your book. I'm interested in how you handle looking at the author's evidence, thesis, argument. That's what you do in a critical academic book review, not a book report. That's something you turn in grade school. Those days are over. This is something different. This is what you will be graded on when you submit this 2-page academic book review. These are the following criteria, in other words. So you've got 2 examples. You have one in the Benjamin book. You have one, Daniel Walker Howe's review of Paul Revere's Ride. Those are really the guide posts by which you want to draft your own review. Don't be afraid to put yourself in there. Okay, I mean, if you take on face value the arguments of the particular author, fine. If not, tell me why. It's okay. And of course, the last piece of advice is to use that secondary source from your bibliography. A secondary source book reviewing an 18-page article, you will not do well when this assignment is graded. You are reviewing a book, a secondary source book. Why? Because you need to understand what you have to do in your own paper. You are doing on a smaller scale in 12 to 15 pages what the author has done in a monograph, in a whole book. You also have to familiarize yourself with the material for your particular subject. So this gets you to read a whole book start to finish. From this book, when you judge evidence, if you are researching a certain topic, and if you are not using as a way to get other information on your subject this author's footnotes, endnotes, bibliography, then you're doing something wrong. If you're scratching your head saying, well, I don't know where else to find more sources, well, you're reading a book on your subject. That's how you do research. It's detective work. It's somewhat investigative. And of course, all of that goes into the final finished product. So that's all I'll say about that. And the reason I combine it with note taking is because you've got a few moving parts going at the same time. You're going to still be doing the research, still be collecting that information that you need to put together your paper. And at the same time, you have assignments throughout the course of the semester. And your next assignment is this critical book review. So you have the titles that you submitted to me. I've given comments on those titles, things like, you know, happy reading and go and other things. And from there, start the reading. Read the complete book. Read the introduction, because the author's going to tell you things about, oh, here's my life story. Again, some of it's in our post-confessional age. You're going to, you know, understand why the author was interested in this subject. But more importantly, he or she will explain what is the goal of this particular book. And that's what you should be familiar with. So this on a large scale is what you're going to be doing. And, you know, a monograph, a big 200, 300, 400 page book, you're going to be doing on a smaller scale, obviously, with a tighter focus. But you need to understand what folks in this particular discipline do and how they go about their particular research, how they got interested in the subject, and, you know, what you hope to accomplish when you were to do this type of assignment. Okay, we're going to leave it there for now and get to work on your assignment and enjoy it.